Hey, estate planning attorney Paul Rabelais here, and in this video, we're going to talk about whether that I'm getting married later in life, I'm getting married again, I want to protect my assets, so I want to do a prenup, whether that use the prenup to protect your assets is actually worthless. Okay, so there's a myth out there that I've had to dispel more times than I care to imagine. Let me give you the situation. So let's call them Florence and Frank. You know, they're getting married. They've each been married before, and they're getting married. Let's say they're 63 years old. And, you know, as part of the getting married process, they want to make sure all their bases and options are covered from a legal, financial, tax standpoint. So they decide, Florence says, well, why don't we go to my old divorce lawyer and we'll get a prenup? Because that's what, you know, that's what people do when they have children and get married later in life. And so as part of that, that's what they do. And as part of that process, maybe before they get married or around the time they get married, or maybe even shortly after they get married, Florence, you know, maybe she tells Frank, maybe she tells the divorce lawyer, maybe she tells her children, maybe she tells anybody who's willing to listen to her. She says, you know, I have considerable assets and I'm getting married and I have my home that Frank's going to move into my home, and I have a couple of pieces of rental property that Florence says, and you know, I have some significant investments, you know, several $100,000 of investments and savings, and I want to make sure that if Frank later in life has to go and do a nursing home, of course I'll keep him in my home as long as I can, but you know, there may be a point where he's kind of big and I can't physically take care of him. There may be a point where he'll have to go to a nursing home, and if that's the case, I want to make sure Florence says my assets are protected for myself and eventually for my 3 children. And then she tells Frank, well, you know, Frank, you have some assets too, and I'm sure you'd want the prenup so that your assets would be protected if I went into a nursing home, Florence says. And Frank has about $100,000 of savings. So they get their prenup done. They go on with life. 10 years later, they're 73 years old. And at that point, Florence let's say she contacts me for the first time. And she calls me and, you know, she says, Mr. Rabelais, I covered all of my bases. I'm just calling because I have a couple of questions. Frank's health is deteriorating. He's fallen a couple of times. He's broken a couple of bones. And we all can see that Frank's mind is slipping. We haven't taken him to the doctor yet, but we all know there's likely some dementia setting in. And so we kind of see that, you know, he may have to go into a nursing home in the fairly near future because I can't take care of him, Florence says. So I just have a couple of questions. And so she says, look, Mr. Rabelais, we got married 10 years ago, and I made sure that before we got married that we did a prenup because I wanted, you know, I did a prenup so as to protect my assets for my children in the event Frank goes into a nursing home. So with all that being said, I just have a couple of questions moving forward. And at that point, kind of the light in my head goes off, and I'm like, you know, Florence, I'll be happy to answer those questions that you have. But you know what, Florence, I'm kind of a stickler for details. Can we go back to that statement that you made where you said you did a prenup because you knew you wanted to protect your assets for your 2 children in case Frank went into a nursing home? She's like, yeah, what'd you have in mind? She said, and I said, well, Florence, you've probably never heard of the Community Spouse Resource Allowance. She goes, no, never heard of anything like that before. What's that mean? So I said, well, Florence, here's the deal. You know, and I realized y'all did the prenup 10 years ago and you did it right before you got married and you wanted to protect your assets. However, from a nursing home or from a Medicaid standpoint, if Frank goes into the nursing home, sometime in the next few months or the next year or two, yes, he has, you said he has about $100,000 of savings. Of course, that's all exposed. He'll have to, spend that down to $2,000 or less. And she says, yeah, I realize that. But, she says, my assets are protected because we have a prenup. But I said, not so fast, Florence, because our Medicaid rules say that because y'all are married, they're not only going to look at Frank's assets, but they're going to look at your assets. And if your assets exceed $128,640, if your accountable resources are more than that, then even though you have a prenup and those are your separate assets and Frank has no ownership interest in them at all, you still got to spend your assets on Frank because y'all are married, and under the Community Spouse Resource Allowance rules, you can only have $128,640 of what's called countable resources. So she says, well, I've got my rental properties and I've got several $100,000 of savings. You mean even though we have a prenup, I'm going to spend all of that? I say, yeah, that's exactly what you're going to have to do. And so she says, well, I don't understand. Why didn't anybody tell me that? And, going through my mind is, okay, you went and got your prenup done from your previous divorce lawyer who, probably never has looked at the long-term care Medicaid regulations. And you probably talked to the people at the beauty shop and the grocery store, and maybe even talked to your kids, and they've never looked at the Medicaid regulations. So you just, right, wrong, or indifferent, you didn't solicit advice from someone who knowingly could have identified that issue for you so you could have addressed it at that time. But now that Frank is on the doorstep of the nursing home, it could be a real mess on your hands if you tried to take action to protect your assets, because when a spouse who's going to be staying at home like yourself, Florence, if you start transferring your assets, that makes Frank ineligible for Medicaid for, likely the next 5 years or more. So now Florence is in a pickle. Now, is her prenup useless? No, that's a strong word. Is it worthless? That's a strong word. Assuming Frank and Florence don't have to spend everything at the nursing home because they didn't, make provisions for that. Assuming there's something left when one or both of them pass away, yeah, the prenup will likely have done its job insofar as keeping assets separate, avoiding our Louisiana community property rules. Florence's assets, Frank's assets when he dies will go to his children. Florence's assets when she dies will go to her children. Maybe since Florence owned the home, Florence, if she dies first, will give Frank that right to live there. And then when Frank dies, Florence's home reverts back to Florence's children. And maybe the prenup helped accomplish all of that, made it real clear who owns what. And that's, again, if there's anything left when Florence and Frank died. But that prenup, if you are under the assumption that couples who do a prenup before they get married are somehow protecting assets from one or both of the spouses going into the nursing home, that's a false assumption. So moral of the story here is get yourself informed. Number one, perhaps you need to get some good legal help as your family circumstances are changing significantly. Number two, here's an idea, like so many others in the comments to these videos have stated, binge watch my videos. Number three, make sure you turn the gray like button to blue by clicking on it, and then also subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything as I keep producing more estate planning videos, and then you'll be informed to take the appropriate action and do what you need to do to protect yourself and your family. Okay, so just wanted to make that point clear on the false assumption that prenups and spouses keeping assets separate somehow protect the assets of the spouse who stays at home when the other spouse goes into the nursing home. Okay, we'll see you next time.